So I'm assuming people can see my my slide there.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
So the title of my talk is Uses and Abuses of Vegetation Data. My name's Rosie, and I'm the GIS specialist for the VegCamp program.
Rosie,
and
Rosie, would you mind minimizing we had a request to minimize your little screen on the bottom right?
Yep.
Sorry to see
that. So Rochelle pointed out that we cooperate with others, and that is true throughout the state. Sometimes we have a large role, sometimes we have a small role, sometimes we have no role, but this shows the maps that are produced using at least the vegetation scheme consistent with the NVCS, but also many of these maps are produced with our other standards of using strata breaks and et cetera, that we all have published on our website, and were in the attributes that Rochelle showed. So first, the fun and creative part, some things that vegetation maps can help answer, like how much of each vegetation type is there? That's kind of obvious. What are the rarest and most common types? How do these types overlap with human needs, existing infrastructure, and let's face it, future infrastructure? How do they fit into planning? And then here's a fun actual one. Where are the best places to hunt for pigs based on structural information? Where are the most likely places if you're going to do fuel load reduction? And then I've highlighted this last one. Andrew Johnson was going to join us today to show how to incorporate vegetation maps into planning for emergency stabilization and rehabilitation after fire, but he was on a fire, so he couldn't do this at this time. So this is going to be another follow-up presentation, and we're hoping that it will be soon, so stay tuned. So now I'm going to just run through some examples. The San Joaquin Sacramento Delta, as we mentioned, has been mapped a couple of times, but that vegetation map is being used in assessing the effects of climate change, because they're looking at what the Delta Stewardship Council is doing is looking at where there are leveed and unleveed areas in the Delta, and then seeing what happens to the vegetation as waters get higher. So that's one interesting use. Related, climate change again, the Sonoma County map was used to prioritize some conservation based on carbon sequestration, which was based on the structural and vegetation type. And so that's another interesting use. And then here we are in Suisun Marsh, which I mentioned has been mapped a number of times. This example, when we're going to take a look at what happens with what has happened with Phragmites in this particular area over a few repeat mappings. So the pink is 1999. Then this is 2003. And this is 2006. So where you can succeed in getting vegetation mapped sequentially, you have further ability to inform management. And it's kind of interesting here. Let's go back for a quick second. If you notice, there's this area, it says it's not actively managed, and then up near the top it says managed with fire and altered flooding. And if we run through this again, to me it looks like the not actively managed area didn't seem to have as many issues as the managed ones. So I don't know that that's consistent throughout the marsh, but if I looked at this and saw that would make me start to put together questions and look for that in other places. So it's a great tool for that. Habitat. vegetation maps are really great habitat maps, and this is an example. Mountain lady slipper is a rare plant, and because it's known to it's known from certain sites, and they looked at some characteristics of those sites. There were certain elevation, certain geology, certain fire history, and certain vegetation. So then, because all of these things are GIS layers, they could then anticipate where else they might be able to find that rare plant. And in fact, in Yosemite, because they had a vegetation map, they were able to do that and go out to verify if that rare plant was there, and were more successful because they were able to use good vegetation information. Leaf Bell's vireo habitat. This group, the Conservation Science and Data Visualization Group, recently took all of the Survey of California vegetation maps within the leaf bell vireo's habitat range, put them together to try to create a habitat map for the leaf bell vireo, which is a rare species. And it worked so well that now what they're going to do is they're going to get funding and try to map that riparian habitat all with one set of imagery to get kind of more of a one time frame snapshot of leaf bell vireo's habitat. And then one of the reasons why this particular map was done at the association level, many of the maps are done more at the alliance level, but this one has been done at least mostly or somewhat mostly at the association level, is there's a desire to see how finely birds respond to vegetation in terms of, like, can you tell differences at the association level about where birds are? And this study is wrapping up and being written up, and very soon we hope to have another presentation that goes more into depth on the results of this study. So stay tuned. Conservation. It's harder to conserve what you can't show is there. So an example I really love of this is VegCamp program worked with Region 1 to develop a map of Mendocino cypress and related oligotrophic vegetation. Before there was a map, the only protections that were there was an ESHA that protected pygmy forest within the coastal zone, but it wasn't even really well characterized. So after classification work, surveying, classification, and mapping of those communities was done, we could show, first of all, that this ESHA, which only extended to the Navarro River, should go further south. And then beyond that, with a map showing where these rare communities are, Jennifer Garrison from Region 1 is now drafting a conceptual area protection plan as a way to prioritize areas for acquisition using Proposition 68 funds. And in 2019, CDFW awarded money to the Mendocino Land Trust to acquire an easement on some of the area that we mapped. So that's successful conservation that was in part successful because we mapped it. So moving on to the abuses, and well, at any rate, the abuses that I'm talking about are mostly bad assumptions. So classification level assumptions. Map includes polygons that are mapped at the association, alliance, and group level. So let's say you're interested in a particular association. You won't be able to just query on that association and your job is done. For example, this little maplet shows a large stand of Danthonia unispicata, Poa-Secunda Association. But down here is the Vancouverian Rocky Mountain, Montane, Wet Meadow, and Marsh group that this association belongs to. So there may be some more of this association in this polygon. Heterogeneity in the minimum mapping unit. So the minimum mapping unit for the Modoc-Lassen map is 1 acre for most types and ½ an acre for wetlands, riparian, vernal pools, and special types. And the breaks on cover that Rochelle described are at 5 acres. But so sometimes there are stands within polygons that do not meet the minimum mapping unit, and that makes the polygon heterogeneous. So here's a couple of examples. On the upper right, there's this polygon is a mapped stand of a juniper association, but the area in the red circle is a small stand that doesn't have many shrubs and is very likely a different association of juniper, but it's less than an acre, so it didn't get mapped. Similarly, down at the bottom, there is a sub-MMU Carex simulata stand that's in this Pinus ponderosa polygon because it was tiny, like really tiny. So the map doesn't cover every single stand that exists because there are rules for the mappers as to how to map. Crosswalks. As Rochelle mentioned, we have provided crosswalks to CalVeg and WHR, but those crosswalks are a convenient reference. They're the closest fit per type. But when you get into the nitty-gritty of how the classification works, crosswalks here are not perfect. So for example, I've highlighted the crux. For juniper, we've got a tail of 3 juniper stands. They all have different rules. Like for the MCV or the rule that's in our report, you can have as little as 3% cover of juniper and Pinus jeffreyi, and it would still be a juniper stand. But in CWHR and CalVeg, you have to have considerably more conifer cover than that, 10%. And so looking at the map, here's a stand, and there's this stand also happened to have a survey in it, and the survey shows that there's 5% conifer cover in this juniper stand. So this polygon, if you look at the crosswalk fields, is going to say that for CalVeg and CWHR, it goes to juniper, but that's because it was the best fit per type. It doesn't actually 100% follow those rules because we can't go through and remap every polygon to different classifications. And here's what this stand looks like on the ground, so you get some idea of the feel of how juniper looks in that particular polygon. These maps are perfect. That's a great assumption, and you should definitely stick with that. We do accuracy assessment because they're not perfect, because it's a difficult job to hand delineate or use other automated methods and get everything right. So I urge you to pay attention to accuracy assessment results by class if it's important to you, and decide what kind of certainty you require in your use. I think also, when you can, add the survey points, that DS 1020 that we'll look at pretty quickly, because these can be useful in sorting out a question. They are ground-based assessments. As Rochelle mentioned, an interim table, AA table, is included in the classification report, but it's going to be supplanted with the final one when the second area that GIC is mapping is complete. Our standard on the BIOS website is to have a field called map class, and currently the map class is set at the association level. And at the association level, for that particular map, we didn't actually we the requirement of 80% producers, but we had 71% users. So what we're planning on doing is when the AA is complete, we'll republish the map. The map class will be set at the level that it meets our minimum requirements, and then there will be a separate association and alliance field. I hope that makes sense. And that separation into like alliance, association, and group level, that was kind of for the Applegate areas, that was already pre-done because they weren't working on association as often as GIC was, and they exceeded the 80% level, so that map is at the map class level currently meets our minimum requirements. So that's a bit gritty, but it can be wrapped up in 2 sentences. 1, be creative and use the tool to learn more about the land you help manage. And 2, know what the limitations of the data are and survey for a more complete understanding when that's necessary. Okay, so I think I can just, if there are questions, I can take them. Otherwise, I'll just move into the next part of the presentation.
Rosie, wouldn't mind explaining user versus producer really briefly?
You know,
or is it too much?
No, it's too much for me right now, but I'm wondering if maybe Rochelle or someone who has actually worked on doing the scoring might be able to explain it better than me.
You had to ask that question, Betsy. This is one of those. No. It's a good question because, yeah, it's a good question. It's always more complicated than it should be to explain. But the users, Diana, do you have that little schema by chance?
I don't.
Oh,
I saw it on my desk at work the other day.
Oh man. So okay, the users is areas of commission, and the producers are errors of omission. Yeah.
I think that's right.
Okay. So, you know, is the map going to be what it's telling you it is when you go to the field versus?
Did the mappers miss something that they should have seen but called it something else?
So that's in a nutshell, and it really helps to have like a slide to show this because it's a mind bender. But if we didn't report both of those scores, people would be like, but wait, there's these other types of errors.
So, and this is Todd, I'm going to try to do this in 30 seconds.
All right.
Imagine a matrix where you have the raw scores reported in rows for what the mappers called it, and the raw scores what the field people who tested and went out in the field and actually looked to see what it was in columns. And if you actually sort of look at the places where the row and the column meets, they're not always the same, obviously, because sometimes the field mapper or the field crew go out and see something and it's not what the mappers called it. And other times the mappers go out and map something, but it's not necessarily mapped by or called the same by the field people. And so basically it seems counterintuitive, but if you look at the way those scores are added up, they come up to different numbers because it's based on the perspective of who's reporting the scores. And that's really the basis of user, producer, or what was omitted versus what was an error of commission. That's all I want to say. It's probably more confusing.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, I mean, it's confusing. Again, like if you can see a visual, it really is helpful. But and we have visuals in mapping reports that you can go to and see that too, if you're interested in specifics in getting a visual for that.